What do you guys think of this one?
Oh, they're
I
all,
thought it was awesome.
yeah.
Okay, I have to ask because we read all three now. Uh, which one was your favorite, and could it be a standstill read alone?
Standalone.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that they could stand alone. I think that this one was the deepest by far. Personally, I don't know. Maybe Stephanie thinks the outward mindset was, but I feel like this one went really far into each different kind of justification, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think the mindset one was more about like just changing your mind, where this one was the overarching everything, how to do it. Like it was answering our questions that we've been asking of,
Yeah,
how to stay out of the box and what happens here. And it was still in that story format, which was really great. It continued it from leadership and self-deception, which that's what I was wondering. I almost feel like, do you have to read that one first to get some context before you read this one?
I don't think you need it, but I think that it triggers like your alertness as like the part of your brain where you're like, I already know some of these characters. Now we're going to learn a whole bunch more about them.
Mm-hmm.
And
Or at
you're
least that's
kind
how it
of,
was.
oh, sorry. And you're also, you've also been introduced to the box and, things like that in leadership and self-deception. So my husband clicked on our Audible book of this and started listening to it without, any nudging or anything from me. And he was like, I'm so confused.
Was he?
I was telling Megan about this. And I'm just like, I don't understand how you're confused. But so I think it's hard for me to answer that question. I think they all can be standalone, but because I read them like in order, so to speak, because from my understanding, the leadership and self-deception came first, and then they wrote the anatomy of peace, and then they wrote outward mindset. And so that's kind of, I read anatomy of peace or leadership and self-deception, anatomy of peace in that order, and then added in the outward mindset. So maybe it just all flows and makes sense to me independently just because I read them in order. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think it helps to read the leadership and self-deception, because I was really thinking about that after we had that conversation, Stephanie. And I was like, you know what? Like it helps to have some context, or like think of it like a prerequisite before you get into something, just to have a background of what's happening.
Well, and it's a way to ease into the whole idea because they ease into it in leadership and self-deception, whereas anatomy of peace is like, okay, here we go. You guys have a problem.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I feel like leadership and self-deception also gave more personal, I mean, this one was relatable, but like as you're reading it, you're like, oh yes, I have that issue, because they were pertaining it to like multiple different people's examples, rather than this one still did, but like you got more examples with it. That's what I liked about it, is between the two of them, you had quite the examples of how you can be in the box and how to get out and all that fun stuff.
One of my favorite things that they do in both of the books is, I feel like the protagonist, right, is always saying, yeah, but, kind of like, I don't buy that because I see this problem, or I tried to do what you said, but I had this problem. And they're always, I remember that the first time I read these books, I was like, I can totally see somebody saying that, as if, if you're trying to describe or explain these concepts to them, I can totally see people coming back with, like these rebuttals, so to speak. I love that.
Yeah. What was your guys' biggest takeaway from the book?
Oof.
The biggest takeaway.
Yeah, like what stood out to you the most, maybe? Because I'm trying to think of mine, and I'm like, I haven't been able to think of it. So
okay, I think I've got mine, but go ahead. Anybody else?
You go first, Stephanie. You're ready.
Well, for me, I mean, everything was really good, but just the way that they kind of sum it up with the influence pyramid man, that was golden for me, especially like I said, this being my second time reading this. Because I think I learned some stuff the first time around, but I'm a slow learner. So I need multiple readings and reminders. And that whole idea of, like each level of the pyramid can affect the levels above or below them. Is it above?
Above
Anyway.
them, I think.
Yeah, above. And so like if all we're doing is correcting, then we're not going to get a lot of progress, right? Make a lot of progress. And so and I only had ever remembered the top of the pyramid and the bottom of the pyramid, but that stuff in the middle is just like, if we can, listen and learn and build relationships and all those kinds of things, we can have so much more success. I think I get stuck at the top of the pyramid a lot.
I think we all do. That's like the first response is
Yeah.
correct someone, right?
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
And it's their problem, not our problem. So we got to solve it.
And not to bring religion in too much, but this coincides directly with like what I'm studying in scriptures right now with the moat and the beam. It's perfect timing.
Austin, did you have a favorite standout?
I think the biggest thing that stood out to me was that they said they had a sentence in there. I can't remember exactly how it was, but it was like conflict is something that occurs naturally. It's something that happens, but that warring feelings or, choosing to be, I guess, what would you call it? An antagonist, I guess, is something that we choose. So we can do everything with either seeing people as objects or seeing people as obstacles, right? And I think that was one of the biggest things that stood out to me, is that even if we have these struggles that we need to go through with a spouse or a child or whatever else, there's still different ways that how we do it, I guess, is important.
Well, they talked about that with like war, right? Like sometimes war is needed, but you can be out of the box in the war.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. So that example was pretty helpful, I think, in that regard.
Yeah.
I don't know. There were so many good things in here.
I know. That's what I was like. I was trying to like pinpoint because, there's so many things that you're like, oh, yeah, that totally is me. Right.
Yeah.
But how do you pick one? But I loved I was just looking it up. Number 21, it's chapter 21 or section 21. I don't know what they refer to it, but it's action. And that was like the guy that taught them all how to do it. Like that was his word, was action. So actually taking the action to do something rather than I can't remember how they said it exactly.
Is that when you honor or reject your sense of?
So it's basically like whatever your first thought is, and it's normally the better thought, right? Rather, before you start thinking out like all the other things, you take action on that first thought because that's normally the best option for you. And that's how I like perceived it, but I can't remember how they said it exactly, but that's how I perceived it, was basically you take action on the first feeling rather than like starting to contemplate or justifying why you shouldn't or all those things. You just take action on your first initial thought. Like in their example, right? Like the guy that dropped the coins everywhere, and the first thought was, I should help him pick them up. But then he didn't. So he didn't take action on the first thought.
Gosh, so I don't even remember this section, but good.
Yeah, I liked that, the action word. So, because I mean, that's something in so many things in my life, I need to take action, implement, and, all that stuff.
Yeah. Something that I think Carol in the story brought up is she said that she feels like she has too many of these feelings. Do you remember that? Too many inklings to help those around her.
Oh, yeah.
And he explained how that's okay. Oh, whoops, I misspelled her. But they mentioned how you can still have the sense to help and not help necessarily because there really is something else that you need to be doing, I guess.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But that isn't the same as betraying that sense. You remember that?
Yeah, because it was that you had the thought, right? Like you had the good thought of it being a person or, like thinking not in the box, you're thinking of someone else, but it doesn't mean
Right.
that you have to act upon it.
Well, I think
Yeah.
I thought that was a helpful clarification in the story, because it can be useful for somebody who's kind of like a caregiver, or somebody who's very empathetic and always wants to help people, for them to realize that they can have those feelings. And sometimes if they can have clarity about like what's the best thing for that person. And I'm going to butcher the explanation of it, but it's almost just like you can have these conflicting feelings that can seem like they're conflicting, where it's like, I should do this thing because that's helpful, or I should do this thing because it, like there's a difference between helping somebody with actions and helping somebody to like reach another level for themselves, like help themselves. I don't know how to say it, but anyway, it helps people who are enablers to kind of like know when they don't need to always be helping, right?
Mhm.
I think I had one of these situations the other day. I don't know if you care to hear,
Let's hear
but
it.
it's been snowing a lot, right? And so the one day I was heading to work and I go through there's a canyon I have to drive through, and there's always people on the side of the road. I'm always like, man, I should go see if I can help them, right? But it seems like, I've been able to stop a few times and help them out, and that's been great. But I had one the other day where I was running a little late for work and passed them. They had spun off, and it's like, I really want to help, right? Calling for that humanity, but if I stop, then I'll have hundreds of other people waiting for me. And I
Yeah.
think it was one of those situations where you really want to help, but you almost
Yeah.
can't.
Yeah.
Mhm.
You being late for work is a different realm than like somebody else being late for work.
It is a
Yeah,
little
like the whole
different.
flight
Yeah,
gets canceled.
Yeah.
yeah,
That's a
especially,
perfect example, Austin, I think, where it's just like
yeah,
you literally need to like prioritize the helping, basically.
yeah,
Yeah, but
yeah,
you
and
were out of the box because you wanted to help them. Like
right,
you really wanted to stop, but you could not stop.
Literally could not.
yeah. And so it's not like I got past and was like, oh man, I bet they were driving so terribly, like they deserved to have crashed or anything like that. Like,
Right.
genuinely still felt later like, man, I wish I could have stopped, right? And so I think that's Carol's example in there, where we can still maybe not take action, but not see people as objects.
There you go.
Yep.
That's a better explanation than what I was trying to say. Love it.
Your example really just helped, like it helped it come through easier to understand.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
I'm glad I'm good for something then.
That was good.
You have great insight, Austin.
Megan, do your
Oh, I don't
listeners
know
need
about
to know Austin's profession to really understand?
I think we've already said Austin's a pilot. So,
Okay.
Yep.
but if not, Austin's a pilot. So if he doesn't show up for work, the whole
Yeah.
flight gets canceled, and everybody loves canceled
That's a big
flights.
deal.
So.
Yeah.
Love cancel flights. The worst is when you're going to like one of these places, like I'll say John Wayne, where everyone going is going to like Disneyland or like this once in a lifetime,
Oh.
vacation, and then something happens and you see them wearing all their Mickey Mouse ears and
Aw.
all these kids, you're like, oh my gosh.
Your heart
hard.
just goes out for him. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That part can be a little interesting, but it's fine. We make it work the best we can, right?
Yes. Yes. Yeah. No, I thought your example was great, though. That was
I love that.
wonderful. Well,
Yeah.
and I love too, like, they talked about the girl that had the no shoes. I don't remember her name,
Jenny.
and she went
Jenny.
running. Yeah, Jenny, and
Jenny.
how the actual workers or
Maylee and Michael.
like they actually stopped and took off their shoes and started running, and they were talking about it's in the heat of Arizona for hours, and like how can we just be there for people like that? Like they didn't, they were just there. It's not
they
even
could have
like
kept their shoes on and it would have
Yeah.
been a lot more comfortable. but they wanted to see what it was like to be in her shoes or without her shoes, I guess.
Right.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah. And I mean, what does that do for her too? Like, oh, they're with me in this. Like, they're not just following me. Like, they're willing to suffer like I am almost.
hmm
Yeah, that was, how do you portray that in life itself? Like in everyday little things like your kids go through, right? Like, how do you, I don't like, they all have struggles. It's how do you not solve their problems, but be there for them, right? Like,
yeah,
it's
that's definitely
it's an interesting concept of not solving the problems or correcting all the time.
Yeah. It's something that I've worked on throughout my whole, child rearing years because I felt like the best way to parent was to be super helpful. And I always wanted to just be there for my kids, let them know they could rely on me and trust me and whatever. And, there is a fine line where you can cross over and they become too dependent and too reliant on you and all those things like we were talking about, whether you become an enabler and so I think in that situation, I probably was in the needs to be seen as box because I needed to be seen as like this super mom or super helpful or whatever, instead of really looking at what do my kids need more than me, doing something for them.
because it makes you feel like you're. What would I'm trying to think of the justification there for yourself? Like,
the justification is I'm a good mom.
Yeah,
All good mom. This is the qualification for being a good mom. This is how it gets done, and that's not always the case, right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
So yeah, I loved how everybody, all the characters in the story, but particularly Lou and Carol, were identifying in the 2 boxes for Lou and 2 for Carol, and they were the total of the 4 different boxes that we find ourselves in. So for anybody who's listening, I'm always trying to remind myself of these boxes too, where it's the needs to be seen as. So you want people to see you as whatever, successful or kind or compassionate or smart or whatever. The better than, the worse than, and the I deserve. And I thought it was super interesting how Carol and Lou were in 2 each, but 2 separate different ones each. And how they kind of were companion boxes, like the better than and I deserve, or the worse than and needs to be seen as. They're kind of companion boxes.
They tend to come in pairs.
Kind of go together. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I love that Lou was like, I didn't realize I was part of this box. Like at the very end, he's like, I didn't even realize I was in this box.
The
Like,
needs to be seen as. It kept showing up for him, and he's like, what? He thought he was so clear of that one. So do we dare ask which boxes we found ourselves in?
I was trying to find like their diagrams so I could really look at them a little better, but of course.
So I think it's for me as far as like which box I'm in. They mentioned being out of the box towards one person versus being out of the box towards another. I think that I find myself in different justification boxes as well towards different people. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Point that, like in the story, Lou was in the same 2 boxes almost consistently in his life, right? But I think, I don't know, is this what you're saying, Austin, where it's like it depends on the situation or the person that you're like relating to, which box you're in?
I do. Yeah.
Okay, I agree with that for me.
Yeah, so there'll be some times where you feel like you're in the trying to be seen as maybe better than I am with one person versus the other one's like, maybe I deserve more than this person. They could go hand in hand, but
totally.
But yeah, I think it just depends. I found myself in all 4.
I think you can always find yourself in all 4, but you might stand out more in 1 or 2, right? But yeah, I definitely think you're in all 4 at some point.
Yeah.
At some point. Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah. Yeah. The I deserve scene. I'm trying to see all of their
I know.
little, they have a bunch for better than.
I love how they have like a box within a box. I don't know if you can see, but like I'm on page 110 of my book, and it talks about the better than box, and it's got 4 quadrants in it because they talk about, how you view yourself, how you view others, the feelings that you have in that box, and your view of the world.
Mhm.
And they went through exercises, I think, with most of the boxes.
Yeah, they
Of
did. Yeah. That's what I was trying to find.
all those 4 quadrants, right?
Yeah, because for example, the better than box, you think you're more important than people.
Mm-hmm.
So your feelings are that you're impatient.
Mm-hmm.
And because I feel like we really those two feelings and yourself are like kind of what stand out more probably to people. So I deserve, you're underappreciated, you're the victim, mistreated, your feelings are deprived, it's unfair.
Wait, which one is that one?
That's the I deserve box.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And then the needs to be seen box is you view yourself as fake, need to be well thought of. Your feelings are anxious, afraid, overwhelmed. The world's going to judge you. I feel like everybody can be a part of that box.
Yeah.
The worse than box is you view yourself as not good enough. You're helpless, depressed. Yeah. There's all the other boxes inside that box, but there's a couple of words for you.
So for me, it was pages 110 to 122 that outlines all those different things and like works through them.
Yeah, mine is 120 to 132. So I don't know if we have different editions, though.
I think
I had an interesting exercise that I did. So I showed Maylee the influence pyramid.
Oh, cool.
We talked through it for a little bit. And so I said, I was trying to say exactly what I had her do is I said, in a percentage, right? How much do you feel like I'm correcting you versus how much do you feel like I'm focusing on making things go right? And then how much do you feel like you're correcting me versus what you...
Ooh, that's good.
So we switched, we both did that in where, I said what I felt like she was focusing on making things go right or correcting whatever else, right? And then how much she does it to me. It was interesting to find yourself inside of the box when you're thinking that way too, because obviously she felt like I was more aggressive at it than I felt like I was, and she felt like she was less aggressive than she was.
So you're saying you were in the box as you were having that conversation?
No, we were out of the box during the conversation, but during analyzing our percentages, like let's say, for example, she thought I was correcting her 50% of the time versus I thought I was correcting her 20% of the time.
Gotcha. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So your perceived is less than what they're actually thinking.
I would say that in our perceptions, is it possible that we're in the box when we're making we were doing that exercise, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's the beam and the moat all over again.
Yeah.
Right there.
It was interesting. It was kind of fun because our numbers were almost exactly the same for each other, if that makes sense. In how much she thought I was correcting her and how much she thought she was correcting me. Like it was interesting.
Oh, that is fascinating. How did it compare on your self-analysis?
They were a little ways off. I think I was more generous on mine. But it was pretty interesting to see.
That's fascinating.
And so I decided to have us do it for the kids as well. Each one of their names and a percentage of how much we felt like we were correcting them. And we found that on our oldest, we hold her
at a higher level, probably
at a higher level, which makes sense, right?
Sure.
But she's the one that struggles the most. And I think those are related. Maybe we're doing way too much correcting.
It's the first child syndrome.
Yeah.
So I love the story that Lou thought of about his dad and the car, the brand new car that they got, and
Yes.
how
Yeah.
he thought he put it in park, but he didn't, and it ended up in the river, whatever, right? And so he comes in to tell his dad, and he's like terrified, right? I mean, who wouldn't be? And all his dad says was, well, I guess you have to take the other, like the truck. Like that's all he says. There was no, and I think that's a great reminder because kids they know when they've done something that they're not
Totally.
supposed to. And I mean, you
Right.
can see it on their faces when they come up to tell you something, or like their face of when they've done something wrong. And so it's a good reminder to me of like, just like look at it and be like, oh, or like just say like something little. It doesn't even have to be, you don't have to correct it all,
It
right?
doesn't even have to be, well, what did I tell you?
Yeah,
You
it
know,
can
because
just be
yeah.
like,
actually that's
oh,
in the
whoops. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it can just be something like that because they already
Oh,
know. They
bummer.
already know, and they're already beating themselves up about it. So
Totally.
I don't know. I
The
thought that
more
was
you
a
try
really
to correct
good.
them, the worse it
Yeah,
actually is for them.
yeah. Because I've noticed that with my kids. I was like, oh, I do that. Like, I totally do that, and they know that they're not supposed to do something
Because you're trying to teach and instruct, right? Which is a valuable level of the pyramid, but your heart is still not in the right place
I
for
was gonna
that.
say, are you trying to teach
Right.
and instruct there, or are you trying to just be like, oh, I already told you not to do
Yeah.
that before?
You basically don't want to deal with it, right? Like we've already
Yeah.
dealt with this. Like, stop making my life difficult. Like,
Right.
Yeah.
because they know. That's what I'm like. That's the key. They know what they've done wrong. Like they know it, right? So I thought that was very interesting because that is something huge. You just put a car in a river,
Well,
and
here's
Not
the
only that,
question.
the brand new car.
I know the brand new car that they've saved for years and years. Like,
I mean, that has to have been a totally fictional character. Right?
it's probably happened before.
I don't know anybody
Yeah.
who would react that way, but here's the question I have regarding that. It's just like, how do people learn the best? Unfortunately,
How do they learn the best?
I feel like
I'm-
most, especially like if we're talking about children and stuff, so
I
many
think it
people
depends.
learn best by going through, like making a mistake or something, right? Like if your kids forget to, they learn that they shouldn't touch the stove. That's the easiest example because they touched it once when it was hot. You could have told them 100 times before then not to touch the stove because it's hot. And then it like really
Clicks to
in
do it.
when they do it. We don't want people to go through these bad things, but it's a great teacher. They don't need us to use more words to try to, I don't know.
So 2 or 3 things that I want to mention. So Eric, my husband, read a book about parenting, and they say the best thing to do is let your kids fail while they're young or learn about going through things and letting them do it with little things. And that way, like, it's like,
What parenting
instead of
book
you
was it?
saying like, I don't remember, I have to look it up and
It
send it to
sounds
you.
like Love and Logic.
I have no idea.
Okay.
I didn't read it. But like one of the examples was, it's cold outside. And instead of you like telling your kid it's cold outside, put your coat on, and then they don't, and you still make them do it. What you do is you can say, hey, it's cold outside, let's go.
Totally.
And if they don't put their coat on, then they have to have the consequence of not putting their coat on. I mean, we all suffer for it, but like, are they going to do it again? No, they're not going to do it again, probably, right? And
Keaton will.
he would do it despite. That'd be like my middle child too. But I mean, I think of like, for example, my kids have library day at school, right? And you think they remember it every single time? No, they forget their library books, right? So they know that at the beginning of the year, they get one pass where if they call me, I will bring them their book, but that's it for the whole year.
That's it.
And I will tell you, they do not forget their library books often anymore. And if we're walking to school and they're like, oh, I forgot it. Can I hurry and run home? Like they have to run home like super fast to grab it. Or if we don't have time, they're like, okay, I'll bring it next week. Like they have figured it out themselves rather than me always trying to help them.
They're learning to solve their own problem.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're like, oh, I'm already on my way to school. Do I have time to run home? Can I do that? If not, oh, I guess I'll bring it next week. Like
Mm-hmm.
they're
Yeah, they're problem
in the
solving.
moment.
Yeah, rather than us solving their problems. And another example is it's with my dog. When he was a puppy, I tried constantly like to stop getting him to pick up trash because every piece of trash was like exciting. And I realized like it was probably a game of me trying to get it out of his mouth, right? And so after I stopped trying, he stopped trying to get the trash. Like doesn't even care for it. Like
Oh, that's funny.
so I don't know like if that's like a correlation too. Like sometimes it's their way to get seen
Totally.
because you react.
Yeah.
Like just some thoughts with it too. Like because there are those kids that, they need the love and that's how they get their love is by the reactions that they're getting because that's how they're getting reactions.
Mhm.
So just a
How
note
they're
to
getting
self too.
any sort of attention. They'll take any attention.
Good or bad.
Yeah, I think that my husband and I had a conversation very similar to that recently, if I remember it correctly, because we have 3 older boys and then a younger daughter who's the baby. And he parented the boys much different than the girl. And he says, things like, oh, if this situation would have happened with the boys, I would have just, marched in there and whatever, and they would have been up and doing it. And I'm like, well, maybe there was a little bit of learned behavior in that, and maybe it wasn't like them necessarily being more obedient. It's just that they had a learned behavior instead.
When I think that's how it is with your first child. Like Austin, you're saying, you're harder on your first kid because you're still trying to figure it out too. Like parenting's not easy and every kid's different, right? So yeah, it's hard.
That's one of the things I really have enjoyed about all of these books so far is that they bring up and illustrate situations at home and at work and even, like in our outside lives a little bit, where all of these concepts can be applied. And so it doesn't need to apply just to somebody in the workplace or just to a parent at home or whatever. Everybody can learn something from it and apply this in their lives, whether it's their personal lives or their professional lives or whatever. It's all applicable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and they mention in there too, when your heart is at war or when you're seeing people as objects, regardless of whether it's family members or employees or coworkers, whatever it is, right? We can't focus on solutions or on results, right? Isn't that what it mentions there? And so all we do when we're looking at them that way is invite them to behave poorly or be less productive, which allows us to be justified, right? In thinking or seeing them how they are, which then justifies them to behave worse. Is that how they explain
Austin,
it in the book?
You pull up some good stuff.
I'm trying to. Right. It's like this big circle that just keeps going around.
Yeah. Isn't that the collusion cycle?
Yeah, that's basically the collusion aspect of it.
That's one of
and
my
I can
things.
see this constantly in myself. I think is where I have the biggest struggle, right? And so breaking the cycle, how do you break that cycle?
It's not easy. But I was sharing a situation that I had recently with Megan where I could have stayed in the trap of the collusion cycle. And it was, just a situation where it was like my husband was frustrated with, a task that usually fell to him. And, of course, he was complaining about it, whatever, and like pointing fingers and blaming and whatever, all the things that we do when we feel so victimized, right? And I could have jumped right in. And I started down that road. I was thinking things and I was like on the lookout for certain things to pop up. And
those triggers.
Yeah, and sure enough, they did. And my triggers felt like got all hypersensitive, whatever, hyperactive. And And I could have stayed in that box, but instead, fortunately, it's right in the middle of reading this. I was able
So
to
you
write,
were ready for it.
and I was like, okay, how is he feeling right now? What are the things that are going wrong for him? What are the things that I can do to help it go right? Like just seeing him for his feelings instead of, I call it the me monster. Did I mention that in any of our previous conversations?
I think you did in the first one.
Yeah. So that's the easiest way for me to just like have my own simple reminder is, are you making this all about yourself, Stephanie? And that's how I'm able to like get out of me and look at other people. And it made a huge difference, like he was grateful for what I did and he didn't feel so triggered and I didn't have to have angry feelings or bitter feelings or resentful feelings or anything like that. I was able to now, like see the humanity in the situation.
Well, and it's amazing if one of you comes kind of without being out of the box. Like, and it's hard sometimes to not be in the box, but if you can try and not be in the box, what happens to the other person is pretty awesome too. Like they start becoming out of the box as well.
But we have to be careful
Mm-hmm.
because when I first read these books, I thought if I'm out of the box, then other people will be and it will make my life easier. So I wasn't really out of the box still.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Because you're expecting something in return.
Exactly.
Yeah. I just think it makes the conversations easier. Does that make sense? Like,
Yes.
Yeah.
it makes it easier to understand each other and not necessarily like things are going to be what you want, but you're going to be more understanding and see their point of view,
Mm-hmm.
if that makes sense. So then you're not going to feel bad about it or angry at them. Like that's all gone. You might not agree with it, but you're not going to be like festering over it for days, right?
So have you guys ever encountered a moment where somebody was completely out of the box towards you when you didn't deserve it and you didn't respond in kind? You stayed in your box because that's where you're comfortable. It's what you really want to feel mad or angry or frustrated or whatever, and you just are comfortable there. And so you don't get out. Does that ever happen?
Oh, I guarantee it, but I'm trying to think of one.
Yeah. I've had a situation where someone was out of the box, but it was because I don't even know how to explain it. I wasn't in the box either. I guess I could just tell you my situation and you see what you think. But my dad had just bought a brand new weed eater when I was younger, right? And I took this weed eater apart because I loved to just take everything apart when I was younger. And so I was fitting it into one of my little pedal carts, those carts that you can pedal and they kind of move forward. I put it in there and I found a way to make it drive the cart around.
Oh my gosh.
And so my dad came home. He's like, "Where's the weed eater at?" I'm like, "Look what I built. Look what I built." And, he was very excited. I'm sure he was physically excited by what I had done, but I'm sure on the inside, he's like, "I just bought this. I just barely got it." Right. Yeah. I thought of that a lot with Lou's situation it wasn't a car, right? It wasn't anything like that. But I can't think of one where I was in the box and someone was out of the box towards me, and I stayed in that state. I don't know if I've got a good example for that.
I'll have to admit that, like right on the heels of getting out of the box when I could have been in it, I probably had an experience, same thing, and also with my husband where he was more out of the box towards me, and I was just like, "Nah, I'm ready to fight today." Consciously, like that was not just like habit. It was
you needed that for some reason.
It's bad. So yeah, it's a constant battle every day, and we can.
You almost like needed the justification, right? That's what it was.
Of course. I mean, whenever we're in the box, that's exactly what in the box, and I needed that. I mean, I've been deep in the box for years on a lot of occasions. And so sometimes it can feel like a slow climb out,
Mhm.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, like for me personally, the further out I get, the harder I work, the more I climb out. Even if I'm not all the way out, but the closer I get to being out, the better I actually do feel.
Yeah.
And the more things go right, you know?
Mhm.
It's not perfect, but nothing is.
I'll tell you, if they got Lou out of the box, I think everyone has hope. Holy,
It's true. It's true. Well, and it's not about being perfect, it's about progress. So you're
right.
moving to progress to be better. And
Right.
every day is not going to be your best day, but as long as you like acknowledge it and try to progress to be better the next day, I think that's the key.
Totally. Yep.
I know Lou though. Oh my gosh. Everybody read the book because Lou is, I would hate having him as a boss.
I had Lou as a boss at the dealership. It's very similar in a lot of ways. There are people out there like that. And so I like the book says, we're all in the box at some point. There's some people that thrive in there almost.
Mhm.
But I think that itself is a progress too. Like getting that deep into the box is a progress. Just like getting out is kind of like what you were mentioning, Stephanie, how it's a slow
Right.
climb
Yeah.
to get out consistently.
I
So-
feel like Lou sunk deeper and deeper over time. He
Over
didn't start
time.
out that deep in the box when he was like first married to Carol, for example.
Right. Exactly.
He fell deeper and deeper.
Well, I
Yeah.
mean, that's because he was like, he wants people to be seen. He wants to be seen as this. He has, like it's all these things. As you start building on experiences, they start compiling.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Building resentments and building whatever bitternesses and proofs, whatever.
Yeah, it's true. Okay.
So how are you going to apply this to your own businesses? What do you think?
Well, I actually think it's easier to apply it to business. I have been using these concepts since day one in my business. So for the last 7 years, and it's massively powerful. I can actually say that I would attribute a lot of my success to these concepts and how I'm able to be out of the box towards my clients.
Well, and I mean, that helps. Like, if you think about it too, people want to work with you because of who you are. Like, you treat them as a person rather than as the next client, right?
Exactly. Just a client, just somebody who's giving me money.
Mm-hmm.
You can see them as people. They can feel it.
Well, and I'll give you an experience I had just recently because I'm designing an app, right? And I've never done this before, and I'm designing it and put a lot of time into it, right? And then I go to the developer and they make a comment about something, and you're like, what the heck, all my work? Like, yeah, you don't know, right? Like, that was like what crosses my mind. And then I have to sit there for a minute and, okay, but they're putting in a valid, like, you have to like talk yourself through it almost of like, because that for a minute, I'm like, oh, I don't have to listen to them. And then I was like, wait a minute. No, I do. Like, I think as a business owner, you need to be open to suggestions, and it's really hard sometimes. And so I think that's just a good reminder of when you're out of the box, you might be more willing to listen, because that's one of the things, right? But being able to listen and see if it's the best thing to apply. And honestly, his suggestion was way better than mine because I tested it out. Like, I went through and designed it the way he kind of suggested it. And I was like, okay, that is better. But like, I was upset at the beginning, right?
Yeah. So one of the ways that I get around that, this is just my quick little tip, is in whatever, especially like written communication with my clients, I remove pronouns. It was just a simple way for me to kind of like explain to, if I were to teach somebody what it is, how I communicate with my clients, I remove pronouns. So it's never like, you asked me to design the, master bedroom because you wanted to have, and da 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 da. It's always like the master bedroom needed to be because of X, Y, and Z. And it was able, the design was able to like work itself out kind of like because of all these factors, whatever. And so and that's a really horrible, obviously off the top of my head kind of example, but I'll write an email. And then before I send it, I read it and I just take out pronouns left and right. And it's so crazy the difference that the tone it makes with the tone.
Well, that's because it's nobody's fault. Like you're not putting blame.
Yeah, there's no blame to be had. There's no ownership of any problem or challenge or whatever. It's just all, everything points back to the design. So
That makes sense.
Yeah. How about you, Austin? How are you gonna implement?
yeah.
I've been working on this. So obviously in flying around, there's a lot of people that get really frustrated with travel, right? There's people that have never flown before, or there's people that are flying all the time, and their experiences are very different, right? So I've been actively searching for this since we've been reading this book, so it's been helpful. So I will find people that look like they're having a hard time. Hey, how's everything going? And just start talking with them like a normal person. Most of the time, there's something very small. Like, for example, someone didn't know which gate they were going to go to, right? And they didn't know how the gate system works. It's like, oh, yeah, it's right over here. Let me come take you over.
Nice.
And that made their whole experience so much better, right? The most common one I find is people don't know what to do with their bags. And so they'll be like just looking around with their bags, like, where do I put this?
That's crazy.
Yeah. And or if they have strollers or whatever, they're like, where do I pick them up? Or they'll miss it. That's the biggest one that I've been helping with lately, is they miss it and they come inside of the terminal and you can't go back out once you've come in, right? So then they're like, well, most of the time people will just say, well, you can go get it at baggage claim, right? So if I'm right there, I'll be like, here, let me just go grab it for you. And I just go run out, I'll look for it, grab it, bring it back. So that's something that's been helpful, is just instead of seeing a bunch of travelers, you see each person individually and see what you can do to help. That's what I've noticed since I've been reading this book.
Man, everybody would want to fly with you.
Well, yeah. It's like you are actually making the company even better too.
Totally. Imagine if all employees worked and thought that way.
Yeah. I was sitting there like, who would I want to fly with? Well, I can tell you what airline I would want to fly with. I want to, like, rather than when you get on and you're like, ooh, that stewardess is cranky today, right? Like,
right. And they often, And so what's interesting is I found that the more I did that, the more people did want to, like, I've got flight attendants now that are switching and they want to fly with me because I also look out for them too.
Totally.
So then they're extending the same kind of service to the customers as well. So within an organization, you could see it.
Ripple effect.
You can see the ripple effect. So like flight attendants, I'll give you an example. They can't get off the plane when there's passengers boarding or offloading, right? Whenever there's passengers on, they can't get off. So if we have 4 legs in a day, which makes to be like a 13-hour day, they either have to bring their own food or they don't eat.
Oh my gosh.
And so
really?
Yeah, they don't have time to get off. We have 45 minutes between when
like the transition,
we take off. And 5 minutes of that is spent cleaning, trying to get ready for the next passenger, right? So every time I was like, hey, do you guys need anything? What can I go into the terminal to get you? Whatever else, right? And so I feel like that has helped a lot just in flight attendant morale, if that makes sense.
Well, not only are you seeing a need that they have and fulfilling that need, but you're eliminating the whole hangry,
right?
For everyone else.
Nothing else. Now, at least they're not dealing with the passengers from this like hungry, angry, I need food state,
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Well, and I mean, that's a good reminder too. Like, I know we've all been in lines before, and the stewardess and the pilots always get a cut in front of you. And sometimes you're trying to make a connection, right? So you might, like, people get upset at them, but it's a good reminder of what they're going through every single day. Like,